It was a sweltering August night in 1976 at the Veterans Memorial Coliseum in Phoenix, Arizona. The temperature outside had reached 114 degrees, but inside the packed arena it felt even hotter. 22,000 fans were crammed into every available seat, their voices creating a wall of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Elvis was halfway through Suspicious Minds when something in the left corner of the arena caught his attention through the blinding stage lights. What happened in the next few minutes would make 22,000 people rethink what it really means to be human and create a moment that would be talked about for the next 50 years. Tommy Martinez was only 9 years old and had never left home without his wheelchair. Born with spina bifida, a condition that left his legs paralyzed and his spine curved in ways that caused constant pain, he'd spent more time in hospitals than any child should ever have to. His small body bore the scars of 17 surgeries, and his days were filled with physical therapy sessions that would challenge grown men. But that night, his parents, Rosa and Miguel Martinez, had made what seemed impossible become reality. "Mijo, are you absolutely sure you want to go?" Rosa had asked that morning, kneeling beside her son's bed in their small two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Phoenix. The walls were covered with Elvis posters that Tommy had carefully cut out from magazines he bought with quarters he found in couch cushions. Looking at her son, who could barely contain his excitement despite the obvious pain he was in, she felt her heart break a little more. Tommy had saved every single penny of his allowance for 2 years, collecting coins in a large glass jar with Elvis's picture taped to the front. The jar sat on his nightstand next to his medications, and every night before he went to sleep, he would count the coins and calculate how much more he needed. When his friends from school came to visit, which wasn't often as most kids his age didn't know how to act around someone in a wheelchair, they would see the jar and ask what it was for. "I'm going to see Elvis," Tommy would say with absolute certainty, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "He's the greatest singer who ever lived, and someday I'm going to meet him." Miguel, a hard-working construction worker who pulled double shifts 6 days a week just to keep food on the table and pay Tommy's medical bills, had initially hesitated to spend money they barely had. The tickets weren't just expensive, they represented nearly a month of groceries or 3 months of Tommy's physical therapy co-pays. But when he saw his son's eyes light up talking about Elvis, when he watched Tommy practice singing along to Elvis records despite the breathing problems that came with his condition, Miguel knew there was no choice. "We're gonna make this happen, champ," he had said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at his son's face transform with joy. "Your mama and I will figure out the money. You just focus on getting better so you can enjoy the show." But the money was only the first obstacle. Miguel had to call in favors he'd been saving for years, asking his foreman if he could work overtime every day for 3 weeks straight. Rosa took on extra shifts at the diner where she waitressed, working until her feet swelled and her back ached. They sold Miguel's motorcycle, the only thing of value they owned besides Rosa's wedding ring, which she'd already considered pawning twice to pay for Tommy's medical equipment. The tickets cost Miguel exactly $187.50, 3 weeks' salary after taxes. They weren't good seats by any stretch of the imagination. Section 300, row Z, seats 45, 46, and 47. Way up high in the nosebleed section, so far from the stage that Elvis would look like a white speck against the backdrop of lights and smoke. The venue's accessibility was limited, with only one elevator that worked sporadically, and the steep ramps that would challenge even the strongest person pushing a wheelchair. But Tommy didn't care about any of that. He was going to see the king of rock and roll, and that was all that mattered. The preparation for the concert took weeks. Rosa had to coordinate with Tommy's doctors to make sure he could handle the excitement and the late night. They adjusted his medication schedule, made sure his wheelchair was in perfect working condition, and packed a small cooler with his special dietary supplements. Miguel practiced the route to the Coliseum 3 times, timing how long it would take to get there with Tommy's wheelchair, figuring out the best parking spots, and even calling the venue to ask about accessibility features. "Mama, what if he can't see me way up there?" Tommy asked the night before the concert, suddenly seized by a moment of doubt. "What if I'm too far away?" Rosa smoothed his dark hair, which had grown back thicker after his last round of treatments. "Mijo, Elvis has magic eyes. He can see every single person who loves his music, no matter where they're sitting. And you love his music more than anyone." Getting Tommy to the venue was indeed an ordeal that tested the entire family's resolve. The old wheelchair, purchased second-hand from a medical supply store 3 years earlier, squeaked with every revolution of its worn wheels. The Arizona heat was brutal, and by the time they reached the Coliseum parking lot, Tommy's shirt was soaked with sweat from the exertion of just breathing in the oppressive temperature. Inside the venue, the challenges multiplied. The narrow aisles hadn't been designed with wheelchairs in mind. This was 1976, decades before the Americans with Disabilities Act would mandate proper accessibility. The elevator to the upper sections was out of order, forcing Miguel to carry Tommy while Rosa wrestled the wheelchair up flight after flight of concrete steps. Other concert-goers pushed past them impatiently, eager to get to their seats before Elvis took the stage. By the time they finally reached Section 300, Rosa was exhausted, her arms shaking from the physical effort of maneuvering the wheelchair up the steep ramps. Miguel's back ached from carrying Tommy, and sweat poured down his face, despite the air conditioning that barely reached the upper levels. Tommy's legs were in constant pain from the jarring movement and the change in position, but his smile never faded. Not once did he complain. "Mama, I can see him!" Tommy whispered with pure wonder as Elvis took the stage in his iconic white jumpsuit with gold trim, the cape flowing behind him like a superhero from Tommy's comic books. The crowd erupted in a deafening roar that seemed to lift the roof off the Coliseum. But Tommy's cheer was different. It was pure, innocent joy that somehow cut through the voices of 22,000 screaming fans. For the first hour and 15 minutes, Elvis commanded the stage with the magnetism and charisma that had made him a global icon. He opened with CC Rider, his voice powerful and confident, then moved into That's All Right, the song that had started it all back in 1954. The crowd was electric, responding to every hip swivel, every pointed finger, every signature move that had scandalized parents and thrilled teenagers for over 2 decades. Hound Dog sent the arena into absolute pandemonium, with grown women screaming like teenagers and men jumping out of their seats. Tommy sang along to every word, his small voice completely lost in the ocean of sound, but his enthusiasm was visible to anyone who looked his way. He knew every word, every inflection, every pause in Elvis's performance. During Don't Be Cruel, Tommy began conducting along with the music, his thin arms waving in time with the beat. The couple sitting next to the Martinez family, initially annoyed at having to sit near a wheelchair, found themselves charmed by Tommy's pure joy. The woman, a stern-looking businesswoman from Scottsdale, actually started tearing up watching him. "He knows every single word," she whispered to her husband. "Look at him." "When's the last time you've seen anyone that happy?" When Elvis transitioned into the slower portion of his set with Love Me Tender, something beautiful and unexpected happened. The arena's massive spotlights, controlled by a crew high above the crowd, were sweeping across the audience as they always did during the ballads. But tonight, one of those lights caught something special in Section 300. That's when Elvis saw him. Elvis was known for his connection with audiences, but this was different. In the middle of Suspicious Minds, he stopped mid-verse and walked to the edge of the stage, squinting into the bright lights, trying to locate what he'd seen on the big screen. Hold on," Elvis said into the microphone, motioning for the band to stop. The music died away, leaving 22,000 people in confused silence. "I saw something up there that just... Hold on a minute." Elvis shielded his eyes with his hand, scanning the upper sections. "There's a young man up there in Section 300, in the wheelchair. Son, can you hear me?" The arena fell dead silent. Tommy couldn't believe Elvis was talking to him. Rosa gripped Miguel's hand so tight her knuckles turned white. "What's your name, son?" Elvis called out. Tommy tried to answer, but his voice was too weak to carry. Miguel stood up and shouted, "His name is Tommy Martinez!" "Tommy Martinez," Elvis repeated, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "How old are you, Tommy?" "9," Miguel shouted back. Elvis nodded slowly. 9 years old. "Tommy, I want you to know something. In all my years of performing in front of millions of people, I've never seen anyone sing along with as much heart as you do. You're making this old performer feel young again." The crowd began to murmur, not sure what was happening, but sensing something special. "Tommy," Elvis continued, "I got a question for you. Would you like to come down here and meet me?" The arena exploded, not in cheers, but in something deeper. 22,000 people suddenly understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. Tommy couldn't speak. He just nodded frantically, tears pouring down his face. "All right then," Elvis said, with that famous crooked smile. "Let's make this happen. Security, I need you to help the Martinez family get down here. And folks," he addressed the crowd, "we're going to take a little break while we bring Tommy down to meet me. I hope you don't mind." "Mind?" The crowd was on their feet, applauding with the kind of respect usually reserved for churches and funerals. Getting Tommy from section 300 to the stage took 20 minutes. The narrow aisles weren't designed for wheelchairs, so members of the audience began helping. Strangers lifted Tommy's wheelchair over seats, passed it down row by row, each person treating him like he was made of glass. "I got him," said a burly truck driver, gently taking the wheelchair handles from Rosa. "Don't you worry, Mum. We're going to get this boy to Elvis." "Here, let me help," offered a well-dressed woman, steadying the wheelchair as they navigated a particularly steep section. By the time they reached the main floor, half the arena was involved in helping Tommy get to the stage. It was like watching 22,000 people become one family. Elvis had been pacing on stage, occasionally talking to the crowd to keep them engaged. "You know, folks, this is what it's all about, this right here. Not the music, not the lights, not any of that. It's about moments like this." Nerd. When Tommy finally reached the stage area, Elvis walked down from the platform and knelt beside the wheelchair. The arena's cameras captured every moment on the big screens. "Hey there, Tommy," Elvis said softly. "You made it." Tommy was shaking with excitement and exhaustion. "Mr. Elvis, I saved up for 2 years to see you." Elvis's eyes filled with tears. 2 years? Well, then we better make this worth the wait. He looked up at Rosa and Miguel. "Is it okay if I pick him up?" Rosa nodded, too emotional to speak. Elvis gently lifted Tommy from his wheelchair, and the boy's thin arms wrapped around the king's neck. The sight of Elvis Presley holding a disabled child with such tenderness left the entire arena in tears. "Tommy," Elvis whispered, "what's your favorite song?" "Love Me Tender," Tommy whispered back. Elvis carried Tommy up onto the stage, still holding him in his arms. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the crowd, "I want you to meet my friend Tommy Martinez. Tommy's been fighting battles that would make any of us proud, and tonight he's going to help me sing Love Me Tender." Elvis sat down at his piano with Tommy on his lap and began playing the opening chords. But when Tommy started singing along, something magical happened that no one expected. The crowd began joining in, but not the usual raucous sing-along of a rock concert. Instead, 22,000 people began singing quietly, gently, turning the song into a lullaby for Tommy. "Love me tender, love me sweet, never let me go." The harmonies created by thousands of voices singing softly filled the arena with something sacred. Tommy's small, fragile voice blended with Elvis's powerful vocals and the gentle chorus of the crowd in a way that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. When the song ended, Elvis held Tommy close and said into the microphone, "Tommy, you've given me and everyone here tonight something we'll never forget. You've reminded us what courage looks like." Tommy smiled the biggest smile of his life and said loud enough for the microphone to catch, "Thank you, Mr. Elvis. This is the best day ever." Elvis kissed the top of Tommy's head. "No, son. Thank you. You've made this the most important show of my career." As Elvis prepared to carry Tommy back to his family, the boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn picture of Elvis, the same one that had been taped to his piggy bank. "I want you to have this," Tommy said, "so you remember me." Elvis took the picture, looked at it, and then at Tommy. "I could never forget you, son. Never." But then something happened that would become legend. As Elvis carried Tommy back toward his wheelchair, the crowd began to rise. Not just a few people, but all 22,000. They weren't cheering or screaming, they were giving Tommy a standing ovation. The applause went on for 7 minutes. 7 minutes of 22,000 people showing respect and love for a 9-year-old boy they'd never met, but would never forget. Elvis finished the concert with Tommy's family, moved to the front row, and every song seemed to be dedicated to the brave boy in the wheelchair. After the show, Elvis spent another hour with the Martinez family, signing autographs, taking pictures, and promising to stay in touch. But the real magic of that night wasn't what Elvis did. It was what the crowd did. In an age of cynicism and division, 22,000 strangers came together to lift up one little boy. They passed his wheelchair down 300 sections, sang him a lullaby, and gave him the standing ovation of a lifetime. Tommy Martinez lived for 3 more years after that concert, far longer than doctors had predicted. He attended 2 more Elvis concerts, always in the front row as Elvis's personal guest. When Tommy passed away in 1979, Elvis sent a wreath to his funeral with a note that read, "To the bravest boy I ever met, thank you for teaching me what really matters." The story of that August night became part of Elvis legend, but more importantly, it became a reminder of what humans are capable of when we put aside our differences and focus on what truly matters. 22,000 strangers became a family that night, united by their love for a little boy who just wanted to see his hero. The Veterans Memorial Coliseum is gone now, demolished years ago. But those who were there on August 15, 1976, still talk about the night Elvis stopped his show for a wheelchair kid, and 22,000 people discovered that the real show was the kindness they showed each other.